All right, good morning, everybody. Happy Mother's Day to everyone that's a mother. Or if you prefer the more modern idea, Happy Birthing Person's Day. Take your choice. We'll be in Psalm 22 today. At least one of we'll be in two places, but that's the first. And we're talking back. What does it look like talking back to God? For us, the Psalms basically are how we would talk back to God. So you might need to close those doors. You back? Can you close that door there, please? I'm getting all that feedback here. Thank you. So we're looking at talking back to God. Moses, he reasoned with God and then asked if he could see his glory. Abraham, he talked with God or talked back to God in a couple of situations. Sodom with Ishmael, but then tended to not say anything about Isaac. So we discussed that last week. So today, this is looking at how maybe we would talk back to God. And I chose Psalm 22, one, because I'm teaching, and two, is I really did want to talk about it. It's kind of interesting. A lot of these are laments. The first book, there's 5 books in Psalms. The first one, primarily David's Psalms or songs that he wrote in various situations. Sometimes they tell us what the situation was. Most of the time they basically tell us maybe, well, like Psalm 21 says director of music, but Psalm 22 says to the tune of the doe of the morning. Whatever the tune was, we have no idea what that tune was, so yet, or they didn't make recordings, unfortunately. It would have been probably pretty neat to hear some of the songs, how they sang them.
Now, George, you are the teacher. You're supposed to know what song they sang. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I know. Well, I'll sing it, but I don't know about
that'll work.
You may not like it when we're done. So, anyway. And you have to wonder, some of these are long songs, and so, but remember, they didn't have TV, they didn't have radio, and sports and things like that. When it got dark, what did you do? If you weren't tired, you sang, so you got together and sang. And, David finds himself in a lot of caves. I read a little article yesterday about caves in Israel, and they're all over the place, so don't be surprised if you see David in a cave somewhere. That's where a lot of people spend time. Cool during the day, warm at night, and so forth. But anyway, and the question that I want to start with is in verse 1. How is David forsaken? Let me put it that way. How is David forsaken? That's one translation of the word, or how is David abandoned? One translation says, how is he left all alone? So that's sort of the idea we'll look at here. Apparently, or possibly, this is a pre-enthronement song. Part of these are David's running around, fleeing Saul, and he's been anointed as king, anointed by Samuel, but he's not king yet because Saul's still alive. He won't kill Saul, even though he gets the opportunity to. David brought that up last week in a sermon. He didn't fully go into it, but he could have killed Saul when he was in the cave, and he did. He wouldn't touch the anointed one of God. So those are some things there. And then as we go through this, we're going to see familiar things because they come from both Matthew and Mark. Matthew 27, Mark 15, and we'll probably spend more time in Mark, and this song, and then how we should read, or maybe think about looking at what Jesus said about being forsaken. How was he forsaken, or was he, or how did anyway, how Jesus was forsaken, or how David was forsaken. What does that mean, or what is he trying to get at, and what was Jesus trying to get at in that? And we look at these verses, sometimes we have to be careful we don't let them stand alone. There are contexts to these things, and if we miss the context, I was in prison yesterday. That doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound good, but anyway.
Just stay one day?
One day, yeah. I was teaching there. Well, I wasn't teaching, I was listening. And I'm working with some Sabbatarians, and so it's kind of an interesting experience. And the guy that spoke talked about their beliefs. And so as he was going through, it was like sermons I've heard and preached, unfortunately, bouncing all over the place, telling these things without looking at a context and trying to understand what the writer was saying. So I think, and theologians, they tend to do that. They'll look at a subject rather than look at maybe the context, and we get into these big debates throughout church history, when in reality, maybe we're missing something else in studying Scripture. So let's just read go through Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. Now this is a lament, and he goes through his anguish at the beginning, and then he kind of comes back and said, but I know who you are, and I still believe in you, and I know you'll deliver me, and that type of thing. So that's what we're looking at here. For in you our ancestors put their trust. They trusted, and you delivered them. So he's crying out for deliverance in that aspect. Verse 5, to you that, I said that. Verse 6, but I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, or let the Lord deliver him, since he delights in the Lord. Now, that may sound a little familiar, because that's also in Mark. So I'll highlight some of these as we go through. Yet you brought me out. Now here's verse 9. He says, you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. Isn't it nice? It's Mother's Day, and I got a text that said something about mothers. So there you go. From birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. So he's making an appeal, but he's saying, why have you abandoned me? Don't be far from me. So I don't think he's looking at, well, God's just totally left him alone to the point that he's never coming back, or he's turned his back on him. I don't think that's what David's saying. He's struggling with his life. I was trying to find this last night, couldn't find it. I know it's in there somewhere. Joab was a relative of David. He was David's general. Joab had tremendous respect for David in the sense that he would do anything for David. David had a fear of Joab. It's kind of a strange relationship. But somewhere near the end of David's life, Joab says, you've been through a lot of things in your life, lots of troubles, or you've gotten yourself in a lot of trouble. But and I think it was in the numbering of the people, but if you do this is the worst thing you've ever done. So David's had a lot of trouble. He's been in a lot of tight situations. People after him made mistakes and so forth. And David admits a lot of that. But people were chasing him all over the place, early on. And that was Saul. And then you had his enemies the nations around, chasing him. He was conquering people all the way to the Euphrates River, all the way to Egypt. Anyone that came into his realm and tried to attack him, he went out and fought. So you can see this was his life. It was always some type of tension. And there was palace intrigue with Bathsheba and Uriah and all that. So there's other things. Then with his family. So there's a whole bunch of things going on in his life. So verse 11, do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there's no one to help. He's dependent upon God. That's his idea there. Many bulls surround me, strong bulls of Bashan encircle me, roaring lions that tear their prey, open their mouths wide against me. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax, it is melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. And again, some of those come from, or no, don't come from, will be in Mark and in Matthew in that text. He talks about roaring lions. He mentions he's been down and fought a lion and a bear. An early, what was it, Daniel Boone? Was he the one to do that? Or was it Davy Crockett? Which one fought the... I can't even remember my own TV history.
Davy Crockett killed the bear.
Killed a bear.
Ah, there you go. Killed the bear. Okay. So he fought a bear, So here's an early Davy Crockett, So anyway, David did those things. In fact, he was going to go out against Goliath. Everybody looked at it as a young kid thinking he could do this, and I would assume a teenager. He said, well, "Hey, I fought a bear. I fought a lion. He's nothing." Okay. So, and mind you, I would not want to fight either Goliath or the lion or the bear. So, you think about. I think the bears in Israel were more like our black bears, smaller bears. They weren't grizzlies.
Still.
That type of, huh?
Still.
Oh, well, yeah. But some of them can be scared off. So, 15, my mouth is dried up. That phrase pops up in a lot of places, usually in destruction, where it sticks to the roof of your mouth. If you've ever, when I refereed soccer, in August, when it was 95 and 95, it was 95 degrees and 95 humidity. By the end of the day, you're trying to get your mouth open, let alone get a drink in it, and you're so dry. So we recognize that here, how the heat dries it up, and this is an illustration of how he's being persecuted or being pushed around or attacked. 16, dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircle me. They pierce my hands and my feet, all my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me, they divide my clothes among them and cast for my garments. So there again are some of the references we'll read in Mark. He says the dogs were not domesticated animals back then, as they are today. But we do have packs of dogs running around. We know we have a little, we don't have it's not little, but a blue heeler. And a blue heeler is one who nips at the heels of sheep and cows and things like that. Well, that's her herding instinct. And so anybody that comes in the house, if she gets over them being in the house, she'll walk behind you and she'll try to nip at you. She does that with me sometimes. She's behind me trying to get her to her pen so she can be in there. So it's still sometimes an issue with a dog. They're going to do what they want to do, but we still like them. So, but again, back here they weren't domesticated, scavengers type of thing. Surprisingly, in many parts of the world, they're delicacy. So, I'm sorry to have to say that. 19. But you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my, now he's asked why you have left or abandoned me. Now he says, do not be far from me. You are my strength, come quickly to my help. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs. Rescue me from the mouth of the lion, save me from the horns of the wild oxen. And basically, those are his enemies, not the animals, the people. They're described that way. Dogs often refer to Gentiles, lions, and, maybe soldiers and things like that. Very powerful threats to his life. But this is a song, this is victory here. He's deliver me. He's pleading with God to intercede. So he's not really left alone. He feels that way, and we sometimes feel that way. We're alone. Where's God? I was comfortable. I was things were going well, and all of a sudden now things aren't going well, and I'm sure we've all had the experience of saying, well, we were doing well, and then it all fell apart. We depend upon God to kind of get everything back together again, but it takes time. And so that may be the struggle he's going through. It may be his feeling of being abandoned. We think we're alone when we really aren't. Then there's stories out there, all kinds of illustrations one can bring up where people thought they were alone and they really weren't. You can look at this Army medic during World War II in Okinawa. It's called Hacksaw Ridge is the movie where this guy went up and rescued something like 70 soldiers and got them down off this ridge by lowering on a rope. And so when they were going back, the Americans were going to go back up the ridge, they wouldn't go till he came. He was ready to go because they didn't want to be alone. They wanted him with them. They wanted to know he was there because he was willing to go through all the fire and save people's lives.
Joy,
Yes.
you had mentioned earlier the situation with Saul and David. Maybe he was going through his battles because he couldn't understand why Saul wanted to kill him. Considering all the time that Saul would say, I promise I'm not going to do this anymore. And soon as David forgave him, Saul was on his heel hot. Yeah. And so he probably was crying out with the distress because he loved Jonathan and he loved Saul in a way.
And what did he do to Saul? There's no doubt, you're completely right. David probably had no clue or understanding of why. And again, he's younger, so maybe that's play a little role in it, trying to get everything sorted out. Saul was jealous, and there's too many scriptures to really go through his jealousy, but he was upset about the song of Saul killed his thousands and David his 10,000s, and David probably didn't think anything of it.
Because it actually didn't come from him.
Right, it did. He was getting
from the men.
Right, he was getting beat up by people, and he was. You think about there's this one, and if I could find it real quick, I know there's a song where he feels betrayed by his best friend. We were friends. We worshiped together. We walked together, but you've betrayed me. So, and he didn't know why. Why did you betray me? What did I do? What's going on here? So there's this total struggle and frustration. He goes to he's fleeing. He stops to get bread at the tent tabernacle area where the priest was. Priest gives him bread. He goes, and there was a guy there, was it Doeg, D-O-E-G, or Doeg, or something like that, an Edomite. And so the Edomite tells Saul, and Saul goes and has them all killed. And David says, why? It was me. Why are you taking it on them? So there's all these things are coming on him. And he's almost, again, feeling like he's abandoned to all this struggle that he's going through. We are in Psalm 22, and we'll look at verse 22. I will declare your name to my people. In the assembly I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, honor him. Revere him, all you descendants of Israel. For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He is not, now here, listen to this part. He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help. So there's from being abandoned to he's listening, God is listening. He understands, he knows God is listening to this. From you comes the theme of my praise in the great assembly. Before those who fear you, I will fulfill my vows. The poor will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek the Lord will praise him. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations will bow down before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. So God's in charge. All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. So that's the psalm. One illustration I like, and I probably should have brought up earlier, is there's a poem about footprints in the sand, and I'm sure everybody's heard of it, where two people are walking along. One represents God, one represents the person. They're walking along, having a nice conversation, everything's going well. And then something happens, and there's a single line of footprints, and it goes along for a while, and the guy that's speaking saying, I don't know where God is, what's going on here, what's happened, this is terrible, I feel all alone and abandoned. And then suddenly when things work out and settle down, two sets of footprints going again. And he said, well, where have you been? And God says, well, I've been with you. No, you weren't. I was all by myself. No, you weren't. Those single footprints, that wasn't your footprints. That was mine. I picked you up and carried you along, bore you along. So sometimes when we think we're abandoned by God or forsaken or however the phrase may come up, and left all alone, that's another one, we're really not. We're really not, but that's the way we often work. We struggle with the idea, well, what's my relationship at times with God? And we have to question or wonder about what we're going through. And so this is David went through that, we go through that. This is a way to talk back to God. I feel abandoned. He doesn't mind you saying that. I don't know what's going on. He doesn't mind you saying that either. Where are you? He doesn't mind. You can say all these different things. Because God doesn't mind hearing those. That's why we're looking at talking back to God. Next week we'll look at Jonah. And he talks back to God in a way that may be surprising to some. And yet, God isn't upset with him for doing so. But that's next week. So let's, both Matthew and Mark refer to this chapter. And I think, let's go to Mark 15. So, part of the problem with looking at a text like Jesus says on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me, is that it's in a context. There's things happening around. And sometimes we will see a verse and we say, well, that sounds so good. Okay, this is my confession as a preacher. Been there, done that. I preach on this verse I've ruined some good sermons because I look at it differently now. But we can look at it and say, well, because of sin, God has totally abandoned Jesus. But is that really the total purpose or the purpose of what's going on? What was he abandoned by God, or was he abandoned because, I'm trying to reword this, abandoned because of what sin can do, abandoned to what sin can do. And sin did its worst and at the cross, in betrayal and denial, and you can go through all the lists in our own sin. So was it he was abandoned to what sin could throw at him? Wasn't that what David was looking at too, and the struggles he had?
I think with Christ, when he was on the cross and he was going through his lamenting, the flesh had already taken over. He was
Okay.
on this cross carrying this for all of us, but the flesh has consumed him to the point that he felt all alone. Even though he looked at John and said, "Behold thy mother," or he looked at his mother, he felt alone.
Yeah.
And even though he was going to be with his father, he knew his father couldn't look on sin, so he was by his side.
That's where some of the questions come up. You know, we'll look at Job last week. You know, the accuser comes into the presence of God. So Jesus, as God, came into the world that was filled with sin. Can he look on sin? Yeah. I mean, you know, I think there's some questions we have to at least think about in that type of thing. But that's a view. This is not a class to decide this is the only way. This is a class of just throwing out more questions than answers, because that's the way I am. I have a few answers and more questions. One of the interesting things about what you were saying, and it's important, and there's no doubt, we have to struggle with that. What is the relationship to being abandoned and Jesus dying on the cross, and the sin that's involved in that? John 16, if you just read John 16, one of these last verses, he's talking to his disciples right at the end of that lengthy discourse. Time's coming, and in fact has come, when you will all be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone. And we know that. Yeah, I'm not alone, for my Father is with me. So is he really abandoned again back to the cross by God? Or is it because of his feeling, and like you said, the flesh, weighing down because of what sin can do? And so that's the struggle we have. Interestingly, in Mark 15, we have a number of verses, and I think I put 21, I hope I did, and following. So I'm going to just read from the verses that are quoted from or referred to from Psalm 22. And they crucified him, dividing his clothes. And they cast lots to see what each would get. That comes from 22:18. They crucified two rebels with him, one on the right and one on the left. Also 22:18. In verse 31, in the same way the chief priests and teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. He saved others, but he can't save himself. Let the Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross, that we may see and believe. And that's 22:6 through 8. Then we have the cry, 22:1, and verse 34.
What book are you in, George?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm confusing everybody. I'm in Mark 15,
Okay.
and I'm referring back to Psalm 22, so I'm sorry about that. Threw everybody off. Way to go. I have succeeded. I've gotten everybody confused. That's just... That makes, I get confused too sometimes, so. In fact, that happened yesterday when the guy was going back and forth, but anyway. There are these references to Psalm 22. So we're in verse 34 where he quotes Psalm 22 verse 1. Verse 35, he cries out. You could maybe get a little bit of that from Psalm 22, 20 through 22. Verse 39, and when the centurion who stood there in the front of Jesus saw how he died, is sure this is the Son of God. Verse 29 of Psalm 22. Some women in verse 40 were watching from a distance. And the idea there is abandoned. They were standing off, standing away. But they weren't really that abandoned because they were there, whereas with the disciples, where were they? Okay, and we'll stop there. You can see that there's a lot of things happening from Psalm 22 that Mark is pulling out to look at the cross. And so Jesus makes this cry. And why he can stand alone and maybe come up with work with sin and how that all affects how we view things. Certainly what Jesus was doing on the cross, dealing with sin, and Paul and others expand on that. There's another aspect of this as well, and I've been looking at this for some dozen years now, that many scholars, not all, not maybe even a majority, are looking at it and saying, well, Jesus couldn't quote the whole psalm, or he couldn't sing Psalm 22. There's no way you're up and down trying to breathe that you could say it. We read these words like, oh, he just said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know. That's not the way it should be read. It's Father, breath, forgive them, breath, as it's dying, the breath's going out. And so these are not statements made like in a second. These are maybe it took him 15, 20 seconds to get a few words out. And so he couldn't quote the whole song. But if people, and Mark and I think and Matthew as well, are wanting people to see that, go back and read what Psalm 22 says. Certainly, if we look at it as David as a pre-enthronement psalm where David's not king yet, well, Jesus now is coming to be king. So we can pull that idea out. And then we can look at it as all these texts, well, there's a prophecy. But we need, obviously, Mark and Matthew to tell us that, but they picked out all these, they were helped too. They picked out the Romans cutting up. They didn't say in David's day, well, Romans down the road are going to tear up these clothes and sort them out and cast lots for them. But maybe that was a common theme in ancient history, plunder. We don't think about plunder, especially when we're watching this current situation. They're not plundering anything; they're just destroying everything. If you find, the Spanish came to the Americas to get gold. They were going to burn it; they were going to carry it back. So wherever you go, plunder was a big thing until recently, when we just had total destruction of war. Sherman's idea. But even in World War II, remember this week, or some gal had this head bust, and she bought it for like $45 at some shop.
Goodwill.
What's the
Like a Goodwill.
Yeah, and somebody looked at it and said, "That's 2,000 years old." And it's a busted Nero, and it was in a museum, and they were able to trace it back 100 years in that museum in Germany. And some soldier, bust, let's take it, so there was a little plundering going on there, but they ended up floating around, and it showed up here, and so now it's in a museum in Austin.
She is sending that back to Germany,
though. I think that would be the right thing to do, because, it is. It depends on who did the bust, but anyway, that would be, at least they trace it back to that. And that's what's the movie, there were soldiers that went looking for, and this true story, went looking for different items.
Monument Man.
Yeah, there you go. And found them, and then and part of their duty was to try to figure out where they came from so they could be returned. And so there's still ongoing conflict with some of that. Now we said all that, and I have no idea where I am now. Anyway, there are all these quotes from Psalm 22. And I think Mark and Matthew are trying to get us to see things, that there's more going on here than just looking at Jesus saying some words on a cross. That he's trying to pull the people who hear him back into the Psalms and into this particular Psalm, where they can read through there and say, oh, wait a minute, look at this. David, king, suffering, all in line there, and then realize this is part of God's plan. Now, as far as how the abandonment work, again, is the abandonment let sin do its worst. Obviously that is the case. Nobody, it's not the worst. Crucifixion isn't necessarily the worst death, but it's certainly a violent death. The bones wasting away, you're hanging on the cross naked over, and again, the movies don't portray that part. You're right there day and night, so if it's warm during the day, it's cold at night. It's not like here where it's already 77 degrees at night. You go to Jerusalem, and we were there one day. As the day wore on, even though it was in February, it got warm, and you kind of had to loosen up clothing. But at night it got cold in those mountains, really cold, and so then you needed all your clothing. Well, you're crucified. And this is in the mountains, mind you, so this is not down by the shore. This is in the mountains. It's hot and cold, hot and cold. You could last 4 days going hot and cold. And what does God do? He sends we can call it eclipse. The sun goes out, however you want to phrase it. So it gets dark for 3 hours. It's going to cool off really quick in the mountains. Let's just face it. You could be 70, 75 degrees at 5 o'clock, and at 6 o'clock, you're at 60, and at 7 o'clock, you're at 50, and it's just going down, and you're getting colder and colder. So here he is being there in the dark. So he went through the heat, and now the cold. This is the way, so you see the bones stretched out. You're losing your muscle power. And then you got the bugs, and you got the birds. If there are people around, bugs don't care about people. They'll just feast, right? I mean, you go out on a picnic and you're going to have flies. It's just, or mosquitoes. Here's mosquitoes. You walk outside for a minute, you've got 100 mosquitoes. Hey, dinner! They're just coming after you. That's the way it would be there too during the heat of the day. And if you put like fires, any type of fire, well, that's going to attract stuff. So it's a really tough situation. I just wanted to bring that out. We cry out to God. This is how we, because the title of the class, Talking Back to God, this is how we can talk back to God. And express our feelings, express our pains. And we don't know what God, I don't know how David felt he was answered. I think by faith he was probably pretty satisfied when he was finished. And sometimes just talking it out helps. Singing a song helps. How many of us have been really struggling and just decided, I'm going to sing some of my songs. As long as you don't ride in the car with me, that's fine. Because then you'll say, stop the car, I need to get out, or return to station. One or the other, but let's stop. So that's the idea that's, I think, important for us to see as well. There's one more thing I want to bring up. I didn't see this until recently, and I thought this was pretty interesting. This is one of the most, go to Matthew 27. Sorry, I need to keep telling people where I am. Matthew 27. Get to where I want to be here. Jesus cries out in Matthew 27, verse 50, in a loud voice. So he's already said, my God, why have you forsaken me, in verse 46. So he cries out in 50 and gives up his spirit. Then in 51, at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, the tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. That is one hard verse. But what's interesting is that at the end of Psalm 22, he makes a statement that maybe be a sort of a suggestion, as it were, to go back and look at this text. Verse 30 and 31, posterity will serve him, future generations will be told about the Lord. Well, he's got the song. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. Okay, we have Psalm 22. So we know what he's done. Or we have a bunch of saints coming out of the tomb. And what do?
They thought it was time.
They went into the city and appeared to many people.
But they thought it was time, it was resurrection time.
Well, yeah, that's one way to look at it. That's what makes it so hard. What happened to them? What happened to those people? But anyway, they came back and said, hey, we can remember Psalm 22. We don't know who these people were. We don't know how long they were dead. In the first century world, they would bury a person in a tomb, wrapped up. A year later, they come back and get the bones, put them in a box, however big that box was, and then they would put it in a family, a place the family put it in. It might be in a cave or something like that. They have found a number of these things, and that's sort of so. Can you imagine one of those opening up? Can you imagine being in the cave when it opened up? What's going on? All the bones coming, Ezekiel 37, all the bones coming back together, and what's going on here? And this is, nobody knows, okay? This is just one of those fun ones. But it's kind of interesting that the end of Psalm 22 kind of suggests, at least a little bit, that these may be witnesses to what had happened. Not just with Jesus, but with David. So, okay, I actually finished a little, almost on time. No bell yet. Anybody want to make a comment? Or, again, next week, Jonah, have fun reading it. There's a lot of fun parts, interesting parts. And, but it really does express something that's very important for us in talking back to God. And then, if you're really interested in going a little further, Job, the last, from chapter 38 to the end, is what we'll look at in Job.
George wanted to say, the situation, even though that happened during the crucifixion when they got up, that was one thing. But when the bones came together in Ezekiel, God was talking to Ezekiel and said, can these bones live?
Yeah.
And he took all of them and he put them back together. And then he breathed into them the breath of life. And guess what? They stood up.
Yeah.
And they became a living soul.
I had a teacher say, can you imagine the noise? All these things flying all over the place, putting their body back together. Spiegler just doesn't have anything on God. That's another one of those great stories where it's a picture and it relates to the resurrection of Israel at that moment, and then or the return of Israel. But anyway, there's a context to it. So, but it's still really fascinating just to draw in your mind to watch all these bones come back together. That's what the Bible does. They draw these wonderful pictures. And so when we ask questions like, well, what happens to a person who's drowned in the sea or got burned up in a fire or was cremated or whatever, and you read that and you see that, you can now imagine, well, let's get these, all the little things together, all the bone parts together there, put it all together and start. God can do that. So I'm not going to worry about those things. People, I don't know what's going to. Don't worry about it. That's God's problem. God has a place to do things, and He's going to do His thing. And
I would say for me, at times when I feel overwhelmed with whatever I'm dealing with and whatnot, and thinking, I'm left alone, then it gives me great comfort to remember that Jesus is our intercessor. When we don't know how to pray or what to pray, we're just too deep you know, and misery or whatever it is, that Jesus is there, he intercedes for us. He knows what to say to the Lord.
Right.
Groanings that we can't, you know, that can't be uttered by not.
Right.
And he intercede for us. Thank you, Lord.
Well, I'm depending on that verse more and more right now, because I don't know what to do with Ukraine
Okay.
and what to pray for there.
Uh-huh.
Not that I want to see anybody, I pray for peace, but,
Mhm.
so, yeah, that's another, we have so many that we can draw on. And that's really the way we today would speak to God, talk back to God. And we can get mad by that, well, we'll get ahead of ourselves here, but we can, say, I just don't understand what's going on. So, all right, everybody's leaving, so no bell today, or whatever that thing is. Thank you very much. Thanks for the comments. Have a good day.